Hi everyone, this is Eric Bond, the founder of Beat The GMAT, and welcome to today's session, which is called Ding Analysis, Strategies and Cases. So this is actually the second time I believe we've done this particular session with Admin Advantage and with Kofi Kankam, the co-founder of Admin Advantage. And it was so popular the first time that we decided together to host it again for this community. So during this session, the Ding Analysis session, we're going to be providing a number of stories from Beat The GMAT community members who have gone through the admissions process and unfortunately got that ding. And hopefully it's not too many of you out there, but probably is, unfortunately. And Kofi is going to walk through the profiles of 3 pre-selected Beat The GMAT members. We're going to critique their applications, their strategies, and provide some tips on what they can do to get back on that horse and apply again and get into their dream schools. So before we get to Kofi leading this session, I just want to say a couple words about Admin Advantage as well as Kofi. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Admin Advantage is one of the top MBA admissions consulting firms that exists today. I've had a chance of knowing the team behind Admin Advantage as well as the services of Admin Advantage for a couple of years now, and they're definitely very elite players in this space, serving some of the most competitive candidates to the most difficult schools to get into. And so at some points in this presentation or even afterwards, highly recommend you go to adminadvantage.com. And Kofi, who is a co-founder of Admin Advantage. He is a regular around the Beat The GMAT community. You've probably seen him in MBA Watch or other parts of our forums or articles. His background, he's very well pedigreed. He's got a bachelor's and a master's from Harvard. And for his MBA, he went to Wharton. Kofi also has a really cool background. He's been a technology executive, an entrepreneur. He's been in a lot of different really cool roles. But his clear passion is in helping candidates get into their dream schools, and he's got a lot of experience there as well. So Kofi, welcome back to Beat The GMAT, and thanks so much for hosting the session today.
Thank you, Eric. I actually was just hoping you would talk indefinitely about how great I am.
I could keep going, but we don't have much time.
No, you can actually. You can. It's pretty much done. There's nothing else to say now. Thanks for having me. We're actually really excited to do this again. It is kind of sad to do this. I know a lot of you are disappointed that you did not get in. Some of you are still on the wait list as well, but hopefully we can help remedy some of these issues and get you guys on your path. So I am Kofi Kankam. My friends call me Kofi, and I feel like for a lot of you, I sort of interact with you on the Beat The GMAT boards, so it's actually good to sort of connect again. We're running this promotion with Beat The GMAT where to which a lot of you actually submitted your application. So we basically said we offer this Ding analysis package, and we wanted to do it for free for a couple of people. And so we had literally several dozen submissions for this, and we chose 3 people that we think are pretty much exemplify some of the general themes and challenges that we saw throughout the course. And we read everyone's application. Actually, everyone got a read of their essays, rec letters where they sent them, etc. But we chose these 3 because we think that we can, really extract some pretty solid lessons for everybody. So we're going to do that tonight. We'll leave you time for questions at the end. If you have a really pressing question, feel free to type it. But hopefully, we'll cover everything. And by the way, I also want to applaud the 3 brave souls who submitted their information that we selected. Actually, they kept their information. We've kept their information blind, but it still is really tough to get critiqued, and they have not heard any of the criticism and the feedback that we're going to share tonight. So they're logged on here tonight kind of wondering what's going to happen. They know who they are, but they don't really know what we're going to say. So hopefully we're not going to offend anybody, okay? In terms of the company, as Eric mentioned, we basically help candidates get into business school. We're actually also into law school and undergrad admissions, sort of 2 new wrinkles, but our staple is really helping candidates from their conception that they want to go to business school all the way to getting into school. We actually help people find jobs when they're in school as well. But essentially, we've got a really structured process that's built on individual branding in terms of people's narratives as well as like critical leadership characteristics. All of us are undergrad and MBA alumni of top-tier schools. So, your Harvards, Wharton, Stanford, Columbia, INSEAD, LBS, Tuck, Chicago, UCLA, UC Berkeley, Cornell, Columbia, et cetera, et cetera. That's where all of our people are from. All of us are fairly recent graduates. There's a lot of diversity in pretty much every capacity, but I think what's most important is professionally. So we have people that have been in finance. We have people that currently work there. We have a former speechwriter for Joe Biden. We've got someone who works in the Pentagon. We have consultants. We've got entrepreneurs. We've got writers. We've got stay-at-home moms. So we have a lot of people that are doing different things. And we've worn a lot of the hats that you, the candidates, have worn. We do demand that all of our people do come from top-tier schools. I think it's really important. We've been very fortunate with the economy in that our companies are going to attract really good people, not just who are really well pedigreed or well educated, but also who are really good people and have good service. And so that's really important to us in terms of the client focus and the performance. Really, all this would be moot if our people were not getting into good schools, and everyone has gotten into good schools. And that's actually one of the best things about, for us in terms of running this company is sort of the thank you letters, the graduations, the going away parties, and that's kind of why we do this. I was telling Eric before the call, I'm supposed to be a doctor, according to my mother's desires, and this is sort of a way that we can help people differently, right? So not as dramatic, but a way to help them nonetheless. Okay, and obviously the proof's in the pudding. All of our people have gone into these schools at the bottom, and more. So we've got a number of people that are waiting this week to hear back from schools like Wharton, et cetera. So it's pretty nerve-wracking. So the three of us started this in Rodney. Basically, we're all Wharton guys, class of '04. Eric worked at GE Capital. At Wharton, he was a student admissions representative helping with admissions. He graduated from Brown with a BS in engineering. Wharton, he was a TWIGO fellow, which is a specific fellowship, and did well there. I worked at Accenture New York. I also worked at a company called Net2Phone, which was a predecessor to Skype, doing voice over IP. I've sort of always been at the nexus of software and education. As Eric mentioned, I did my undergrad degree in neurobiology at Harvard, stayed there for a master's in education, and then went to Wharton, was a Joseph Wharton Fellow, and ran a conference, was a teaching assistant. Eli Kennedy, very comparable as well, went to Howard, basically ran the conference with me. Rodney Morrison worked at Lehman Brothers, worked at an organization called MLT, and also worked at Wharton Admissions for about 7.5 to 8.5 years, undergrad and grad. Okay, that's kind of all we're going to talk about on us. If you want more information, you can go to adminadvantage.com. We also actually have a page for Beat the GMAT folks. So it's adminadvantage.com/beatthegmat. So you can sort of go in each way. It doesn't really matter. We'll find you. We can talk. And you guys can have a free consultation if you desire. Let's talk about some of the trends from the several dozen. I think we had something like maybe 5 to 6 dozen people that submitted information. So let's talk about kind of what we saw. Okay. So we looked at the applications. We reviewed the essays, reviewed the resume. Some people didn't always have the recommendations, but when they submitted them, we looked at them. Okay. Now we chose the 3 people for specific reasons. Some of them, one of them specifically was sort of, from our perspective, obviously not going to get into school. But 2 of them actually had really good sort of assets, and they were somewhat surprising to get in. I could sort of understand why, but there were subtleties about why they didn't get in from our perspective. And so we chose them because most of you are actually really good candidates, and most of you have a lot of really strong assets, and so you were at the margin in terms of getting in, and you didn't get in. And so we thought it would be better to have those kinds of people as opposed to people with obvious flaws in their candidacy, like 2.0s in terms of their GPAs or 610 GMATs applying to, your Wharton, Harvard, Stanford, Columbia. We don't have those people. Everyone's fairly competitive, okay? We thought that they'd offer really good learning opportunities. And I just want to say in closing about this, please don't be discouraged if you weren't chosen. We just couldn't choose everyone. And also I want to say, just sort of a disclaimer, we're going to analyze weak points about people's applications. That doesn't necessarily mean that we've identified exactly why they were not accepted. We weren't in the admissions, we weren't in those admission committee meetings. We're identifying things which made their candidacies weaker, which we think were contributing reasons, but to be honest with you, unless you're sitting in admissions at the time, you're not necessarily going to know exactly what happened. Okay. The other thing, the last point is, there also is a tendency when you're not accepted to assume that there was something wrong with your candidacy, and that just may not be the case, right? Most of you on this webinar were applying to top 20 schools. Their acceptance rate at those schools is 20%, okay, generally. 27% at Stanford all the way to 25%. You can be a very good candidate and just not get in. You could be a candidate in the 79th percentile theoretically, and let's say a school is accepting people, you know, in the 20 and 80th percentile and up, right? They've got a 20% success rate. You may just have missed it. So don't necessarily assume that because you didn't get in, you know, it's your fault. I guess this is sort of a typical, you know, when my high school girlfriends broke up with me and said, you know, it's not you, it's me. But really, it could be the case. So don't be too discouraged. Pick yourself up, go through morning, and you know, and wake up the next day and try again. Okay. So here are the things that we saw thematically. One, we saw people, most of the people that submitted applications had very, very weak brands. And what I mean by that is, when I read their applications, and Eric read, and we had a couple other members of our team get through all this, when we read people's applications, we did not put them down saying, here are 3 or 4 critical leadership characteristics about this person. So if I read someone's application, I put it down, and Eric said, tell me about that person, you know, how would you describe them? I couldn't say, this person's analytical, this person is civically or community-minded, this person is adaptive, this person is a great communicator, this person's able to make decisions with limited information, right? I couldn't necessarily, this person's persevering. When I could sort of speak about those things generally over the course of maybe like 5 to 10 minutes, but people were not writing their applications, putting me as a reviewer in a position where I can immediately pick those things off. They weren't writing it with that intent, saying, I am going to give, you know, a couple of critical leadership characteristics around which I'm going to base my entire application, right? My essays, my resume, my interview, my letters of recommendation, sorry, and sort of the non-essay data portion of the application. That wasn't happening, okay? And there also were not 3 to 4 core stories that really exemplified those traits. And so in that sense, there was no cohesion to the application. The essays seemed like they were written in a disjointed fashion. 1 was written, essay 2 was written, essay 3 was written, the non-essay data portion was done, the resume was done, the letter of recommendation was done, but there wasn't a unifying premise. There weren't sort of unifying cross-themes, cross-linking themes that pulled everything together. And that was a huge issue for pretty much, I'd say, 90+% of the candidates that we got, okay? Secondly, there wasn't a differentiation strategy that we saw. So, you know, people sort of somewhat assumed that, hey, I've got a 770 and a 3.6, I'm going to get into the school because, you know, I'm sort of, I killed it. I'm in a 9th plus percentile for both things. People were not keeping in mind that, you know, in the top 20 schools, having a 3.4 to 3.6, having a 700 to 730, that literally is the mean. That's par for the course, okay? So we didn't see people, you know, spend enough time, especially if they were coming from traditional fields like a lot of technologists or a lot of investment bankers. They weren't doing things or writing about things that make themselves unique. They're sort of just giving the tried and true material, and that hurt people a lot, okay? And again, sort of the last point on that page, we didn't have a clear set of takeaways after reading the application. So we believe that your job as an applicant is to put a reviewer in the best possible position to advocate for you, to sponsor you. So in a dramatic instance where they're asking, okay, we've got 2 spots to Stanford Business School, you know, why should we accept Eric Bond over Kofi Kankam? Probably lots of reasons, right? But why should we accept Eric Bond over Kofi Kankam? You know, there weren't things that were very easy to decipher. There weren't really strong talking points that admissions officers could use to stand up in a room and say, we've got to take this guy for X, Y, and Z reasons, okay? So those were, you know, 2 really key things that we saw that which were really, really plaguing the entire set of applications that we reviewed. So you've got to formulate a brand that's consistent across your application, all the different parts. Recommenders. We saw a lot of recommendations which were kind of average. They were unenthusiastic, and we'll sort of go through that, with the 3 candidates we looked at. They were not effusive. They say, this person's talented, he or she is really good, but you didn't get the feeling that the recommender was dying for this person to get into school. Okay, you didn't get the feeling the recommender was honored that they would have a chance to really impact or shape this person's career, and that was a real problem. Okay, so we saw a lot of average recommendations. If you have an average recommendation, that's weak, because it's weak in the context of everyone that gets into school has a really, really strong set of recommendations, or like in Stanford or Harvard's case, sort of a trio, a group of recommendations. They're all superlative. They're all very strong and exceptional. And we saw a lot of them that were kind of ho-hum. Okay, it was very clear that some of these recommenders were not prepared. They didn't understand what they were supposed to cover in terms of the stories, experiences, and accomplishments. They didn't really understand. They weren't told the leadership characteristics to emphasize, things like being analytical, being a great communicator, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and it also was clear to us that some of the recommendations were rushed. There were typos. Recommenders basically wrote 70 words in a 250-word allotment. Okay, so we're speculating, because we've seen this, that a lot of the recommenders were not given enough time to put together recommendations. And also, we saw a bunch of candidates that really would have benefited from, and I'm not sure if they had them or not, because we didn't ask for them, but candidates that would have benefited from a supplemental recommendation, either from a current student or an alum. And so we want to remind you to not forget to use your supplemental recommendations. In terms of the application itself, i.e. like the non-essay data portion of the application, across the candidates that we saw, this was very, very weak. There were a lot of people that did not fill the space. There were a lot of people that clearly were doing this sort of as an afterthought to their essays, maybe a day or two beforehand. People were not results-oriented in the descriptions, right? So the jobs or extracurricular activities, they would say, I was involved, I was part of the Key Club, or I led the Key Club, or I ran my lab. But they didn't say, in that year of the Key Club, we went through, we had a record number of candidates come through, or I received the highest marks for satisfaction, or in my laboratory, I oversaw this lab in university and we produced 20+ papers, or in my job, we basically, I ran sort of recruiting for my alma mater. We brought in the highest number of candidates we brought in any specific year in the last 10 years. There was nothing, there weren't enough results offered in the applications descriptions themselves, okay? And we also saw people, and one of our candidates we're going to talk about tonight, we also saw people that didn't really have the right mixture of sort of education plus a job plus extracurricular activities. So, we saw people that were scientists, for example, and worked as technologists in laboratories, and they weren't speaking about, they wrote about sort of only science activities that they were involved in college, as opposed to writing about things which sort of fleshed them out a little bit. We saw the other side, people that were strict humanities majors, people that worked as writers, worked for magazines, and they didn't really indicate any activities which showed any sort of analytical prowess, and they also potentially had weak GMATs as well. So these are kind of the issues that we saw that sort of plagued people at a sort of more sort of 64,000 foot level. We saw this across the applications. Okay. Resume. People did not start with the most recent activities, so the resumes were disorganized. People were 2-3 years out of school and had a page and a half on a resume. It should really be 1 page. People tried to just jam bullet points in there, not thinking about how bullet points added value. So we saw a person that had, this person was 4 years out of school, had a 2.25 page resume, and literally had about 7 to about 13, 14 bullet points for each job they had. Okay, that is not specific. Doesn't draw the reviewer's attention to a few critical things that you really want to highlight. Okay. Also, there were issues in terms of dates. So just as this is one of my pet peeves when I used to review people's resumes, I want to see months, right? So when someone puts 2006, 2008, I don't know if that's December 2006 to January 2008, which is much different than January 2006 to December 2008. So, you know, we saw people that didn't put that kind of thing in. They didn't put in the quantitative achievements. They didn't, you know, if they weren't promoted, they didn't show an increased level of responsibility over time. And those were issues that plagued the resumes of all the candidates that were not accepted. Okay. Generally, we saw that the experiences were a little bit weak. College experiences, especially for the 2+2 people, they were sort of not really rigorous enough. People were getting starstruck by the schools in the context of they were thinking and writing about all the famous alumni that went to the school, you know, their friend they know that went to the school. They were literally quoting stuff off of the website. I mean, Wharton knows who went to their school. Harvard knows that Bloomberg and W. Bush and those people went to school. You don't have to put that in your essays, okay? I want people to realize that past is prologue. And what I mean by that is, you know, if you are indicating that you're going to be a strong leader on campus, you have to have showed that leader or demonstrated that leadership ability in your job and or in your university days. And I think a lot of times people sort of wanted to dissociate themselves, or they were making sort of really big claims about all the things they were going to do, including maybe being a great student, and maybe they didn't have the best GPA in college. And so admissions officers definitely have the perspective of past being prologue, right, especially with regard to your academics, okay? Realize that, you know, candidates of well-represented groups have to work hard to differentiate. So we had a lot of Indian candidates. You know, there are a lot of Indian really strong applicants, and unfortunately what that means is you've got to be different, right? So Indian applicants, you know, we call spades spades here, guys. So, you know, white guys applying from finance, right? You know, Asian males as well. It's really difficult to get into some of these schools because there's so many qualified applicants applying. So you've got to work a little bit extra hard to differentiate. And then we saw way too many spelling mistakes and grammar issues in this day and age where you have multiple friends to review your stuff and or you have spell check. Like we saw people substitute Wharton for Harvard. It was bloody, guys. It was bloody. So those are some of the things that we've seen. Okay, essays, very conversational writing. People did not use the optional essay well. Either they didn't use it at all, or they just went on and on and on because there was no word count. People were too honest. People spoke about being lazy in college. People spoke about taking shortcuts. People spoke about being unmotivated and things that they're not really passionate about. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So can you guys hear me now? Okay. We saw people that didn't answer all the questions and the people that weren't specific about the school to which they wanted to apply. Okay? All right, let's get into it. Let's get to the meat of it. So here's the first candidate we saw. Okay, so basically was educated in Sydney, University of South Wales, failed 2 courses, superlative GMAT overall, okay? Basically, male Chinese, went to Australia, moved there at a fairly young age, knew English and Mandarin, so that was fairly impressive. Had worked basically doing electrical engineering in the U.S. and Australia, had achieved the title of senior engineer, where he supervised, you know, basically subordinates. And extracurriculars, had been involved in a couple of things, okay? And was looking at Harvard, Wharton, and Stern, okay? So from our perspective, scores, you know, decent. It's a mixed bag in the context of he had a great GMAT, but, you know, sort of the GPA, you know, concerned us, okay? Background, very competitive, as I mentioned, the Asian candidate. Work experience, we like this, right? 5 solid years by matriculation, had been a team lead, very strong in that context. Extracurriculars, not a lot of impact, okay? So there was nothing recent either, and there was a huge gap between this person being super involved in college and sort of not being as involved now, all right? Recommendations. So this is what I was talking about when I said, like, you know, people, the recommendations basically concerned us a little bit. So here's the praise that we found, okay, that these are actually direct quotes. Now, the first thing I want you to notice is this was literally a 250-word section, and less than a third of it was basically used. And that says something as an interview, as a reviewer, if a recommender is going to basically not have enough stuff to write about, they're going to wonder, how strong is this person? Okay? So there was a question asked, how does the candidate's performance compare to his or her peers? And as opposed to the recommender immediately coming out and saying he was in the top 5%, which is actually what one of the recommenders did. This recommender spoke about reaching a position much faster than most, even faster than people with stronger experience in the area. That's not definitive enough. That's not effusive enough. That's just not strong enough, okay? But there were some positive things in here also, right? Great leadership qualities, true team player, passion, technically very smart and competitive. It was good. It wasn't great. And it was also reduced by the fact that, again, 74 out of 250 words were used. Now, the funny thing is, in this same recommendation, in the criticism, what's the most constructive feedback, the person almost had twice as much, word capacity, right? So they basically wrote like 150 words in terms of critiques, but when it came to sort of praise, it was very short, and that concerned us a little bit, okay? Improvement, okay, so fine. They not focus on issues. They could be a bit more tolerant and speak the language in a way that others can understand. Not everyone possesses the same degree of depth of knowledge. Okay, that's fine. We didn't have a huge issue with that. But generally, there were spelling errors, okay, and grammatical errors, and that made us feel like, is this person focusing on this? Is this person a true leader in the company? This person being the recommender. There were general platitudes, a little too much. So when I see that someone's used 74 to 250 words, what I'm thinking is they're describing this person's great leadership qualities, being a true team player. Give me examples. There's capacity for examples here. Give me at least one example of this person being a team player. And the fact that that wasn't there, that definitely undermined the recommendation, okay? And it made it seem like there was no passion and just was not persuasive or compelling. And I got to be honest with you, this makes me angry because this makes me, I get angry when I see good candidates whose recommenders are not supporting them enough. And you guys have to manage these people, right? Well, I've been in that position as an applicant for college and for business school. You've got to make sure they're not undermining the rest of your candidacy. It's very important, okay? So here's a snapshot of the essay. So this is for Harvard, okay? So the first thing you have to say is get to the point. And this is kind of a tricky webinar to do because we have to put a lot of text in so you guys can sort of get context and talk at the same time. And I'm sorry if it's like very text heavy, but it's kind of the only way we're smart enough to figure out how to do it, okay? So 3 biggest accomplishments. This was what the person wrote for the first one, right? Arriving at the Melbourne airport, blank, blank, blank. This is 58 words, okay? The 3 biggest accomplishments is a 600-word essay, which you have to give 3 accomplishments, right? So you're presumably going to do 200 words approximately per accomplishment. This person used 58 words, about 39%, 30% of their word capacity was used on this. They didn't explain the accomplishment. I read this and I had no idea what they were going to talk about. All I knew was that they just had wasted a large portion of the space in which they could be giving details about the specific accomplishment, okay? So that goes to the second point. This person was fairly technical, as I went over his background before, right? And he was getting lost in the details. There's too much technical writing without answering the question. So look, I majored in neurobiology in college. I read this and I thought, okay, what is this? What is he really trying to say? Right? Production network from the business network. Nah, not direct enough, okay? You have to be miserly. You have to be very greedy with your words when it comes to writing these essays because they deliberately do not give you a lot of word capacity. I'll give you an example. My dad works at NASA, okay? And 10 times smarter than me, admittedly. My dad would tell me he would go into presentations with his boss, and his boss would say, you've got 2 minutes to explain to me what the technical problem is, what the fix is, and how this is going to impact, our future missions. Okay, and that's the kind of mentality you have to have when you do this. Okay. Third point. So the message that this guy was delivering. So in the setbacks essay, he was writing about some setbacks, which is fine. He said, this experience taught me that I can lose focus easily. You can't say that, right? Because that just jumped out at me, especially in an environment where a lot of the other portions of the application are not crystal clear. These are the kinds of catchphrases which can really trip up your candidacy. Nobody wants to hear you're going to lose focus easily. That's very damaging, especially when you're going to a school and you're going to take a bunch of classes potentially you don't want to take. You know, you're going to be doing things that you don't want to do, even in classes you like. Professionally, you're going to do things. I run my own company. I have to do things every day I don't like to do, right? So you have to be very careful of the message you're delivering at different points. And I thought this was a mistake on the candidate's part, okay? The candidate also made some definitive statements that concern me, and concern me in the capacity, I want this guy to get in, okay? So this guy was basically interested in going into sort of a consulting company that he wants to do consulting on a manufacturing side. That's kind of his goal. And he made a comment that, you know, like McKinsey and Bain and BCG don't have that yet, but they're going to add to it. Well, if you say you will join this firm and they're just beginning to roll this out, that could be of concern to an admissions committee that might think, you know, this guy's going to come to our school and his firm may only have, you know, 30 jobs in the whole country that they're basically making available to interested MBA. So business schools are always concerned about you getting a job. From a very cynical perspective, that's partially how they're ranked. That's partially how it's determined whether or not you are going to give money, right? The longer you don't have a job, the less likely you're going to give money because, one, you don't have any money to give, and second, because you have a bad experience. So they're very wary of admitting people that they think may have job issues. And so you've got to think about that in the context of what you write, okay? Essays, again, continuing. So this guy wrote about, there was an optional essay, answer a question that you wish we'd asked, okay? And this candidate, I actually would love to hang out with this candidate because I'm into history and I'm into art and I like to travel quite a bit, okay? But this guy wrote about antiques being his passion, okay? Very interesting essay, maybe for a college essay. Very interesting from just sort of a novel perspective. Not a great essay in terms of advancing your agenda, especially if you have an issue potentially you failed 2 classes, especially if you're applying to a school like Harvard where, you know, there's a 12 or 13% acceptance rate. Everything has to be strategic. This was not, it was a very interesting essay, but it didn't really advance his brand, and it did not push forward an agenda in terms of selling him as an exceptionally unique candidate to basically get into business school. This is, look, I'm on Beat the GMAT every day, and I love the fact that people are talking, conversing with each other, and they're sharing information. But this is a competitive process, and so you are competing with people, and so you have to leverage every single asset that you have. And this was not the right place to basically write about that when the candidate was applying to a very competitive school and had some issues in his or her candidacy. Okay. So the HBS specific component as well. So look, all these schools are aware that they've got great brands, and that's obviously a huge issue in terms of a huge attractant for you to go to those schools. However, they all want to see that you're well versed in their school, that you really want to go for the right reasons, that you've imagined how you're going to contribute to the community, that you've thought about courses you're going to take, clubs you're going to lead, classmates you're going to interact with, alums you've already talked to, and there wasn't enough of that. So this was really the bulk of why HBS. Now HBS is one of those schools that, to a certain extent, they assume that they're going to, if you get in, you're going to go, right? Because they have a really high matriculation rate. However, they still lose people, and definitely schools like Stanford, schools like Wharton, schools like Columbia, Kellogg, all those other schools, they want to make sure that if you get in, you're going to come. And frankly, the yield rate, the matriculation rate, that is also a factor which goes into the rankings. And every school wants to minimize their acceptance rate but have the highest yield rate possible. And so if they get a feeling that you're only applying to the school because it's got a great brand, that's not going to make them feel like you love it and you're going to get in. You're going to go if you get into their school and get into Columbia and get into LBS and get into NCN and so forth. So you've got to be very careful about that. Okay. Takeaways for candidate 1, you've got to do more stuff outside of work. Okay. So find a passion, have an impact, get involved like tomorrow, because you did not have enough leadership outside of school, I think, to be really competitive. Consider taking a class or 2 because of the courses that you failed. Look to take a class potentially in finance, accounting, economics, or stats, okay? The reason why you want to do this, 1, it's called building a supplemental transcript. You can sort of increase, quote unquote, your GPA, but it also shows a certain level of self-reflection and humility that you're going to need as a business leader. The fact that you're reflecting that, you know what, my candidacy is not as strong as maybe other people's, and I need to do some things to remedy this situation. That is a big, big deal, okay? Obviously, you want to get A's in those courses, but you really need to look into taking those courses, okay? When I say fix your essays, I know that's a little bit cavalier, but I want you to think about sort of building the brand. Really craft a narrative, again, those 3 to 5 leadership characteristics that you want to build your application around, and maybe 5 to 7 stories, which kind of like showcase those characteristics, okay? Get to the point. Be concise, okay? That will help you be more compelling, because I imagine actually you're pretty interesting. I'm saying that partially because you're Australian, right? Like every Australian I know is interesting, right? But all jokes aside, your application was not compelling because you were not direct, and that is something I want you to focus on, okay? In terms of your recommenders, prepare them. Give them the game plan. Tell them what your brand is going to be. Tell them, make sure they're clear about why you want to get an MBA, why you want to get it now, your areas for focus in the school and outside the school. Give them time, especially those of you working in big companies, consulting companies, banks. Give people time because you know they're going to be writing a lot of recommendations for a number of people. Now, for example, round 1 for next year is probably going to be due in October, November. Round 1 applications are going to come out by July 4th weekend. So there's no reason why you cannot get your application together, think about the points you want, and be talking to your recommenders by mid to late July about what you want them to write and giving them a deadline of September 15th, right? Those are the kinds of things that really good candidates, the candidates that are getting in, that's the kind of stuff they're doing. And I'm speaking from experience because that's what we advise them to do. That's what we did personally. That's what you see, and you guys have to start doing some of that. Really important, okay? Realize that people may have biases. So, you know, we've seen a lot of the people that work in technology, they have a technology recommender. Let's say they do tech support at a bank, for example. A lot of times the technology recommenders can be a little bit understated. They can be very plain. You see that also with foreign recommenders as well. Some of it's a cultural thing. So there's sort of a stance of like not bragging, not beating your chest. You can't afford to have that in your recommendation because that's actually somebody else doing it for you. So keep that in mind, okay? And if recommenders are not going to be really good writers, find other people, especially if you've got time to think about it. Overall, candidate 1, think about your risk profile next year in the context of school selection. So if you're going to apply to 5 schools, you know, maybe you apply to Harvard, Wharton, Stanford, sort of your tier 1. Maybe you choose, you know, maybe you're super aggressive and also add Columbia and add Chicago. Or maybe you say, you know what, I'm going to apply to 1 of Harvard, Wharton, Stanford, 1 of Chicago, Kellogg, Columbia, MIT, and Dartmouth, and 3 of schools sort of in that tier 1B category, 3 of like a UVA, Carnegie Mellon, Georgetown, Michigan, UT Austin, etc. Okay, so think about what you want your risk profile to be for next year. Work on your extracurriculars, and basically, you know, your foundation for work is pretty good. Continue to do well in your job. Make sure you continue in that, even though you're going to be focusing on these other things. Okay. Candidate 2. So this candidate went to University of California, San Diego, did very well academically. Okay, 3.7, 730, very nice. Female, which definitely helps. Chinese American, very strong language capacity. Okay, we like that. Work experience, 4 years. Yeah, had gotten promoted. However, the thing that worried me a little bit was it was great that she'd been promoted. She had results. She had leadership, but she'd worked in 3 companies. It hadn't necessarily been her fault because she had to deal with a family issue and take care of her parents. So she had to leave one job after having worked there for 3 or 4 weeks, but that definitely still concerned me a little bit, and it wasn't, that's not super positive, right? Ideally, she would have worked in 2 companies, maybe 1 company over the last 6 years, had a really strong history of promotion. I recognize that doesn't happen as much anymore, but 2 companies would have been ideal. Obviously, the less time you spend in a particular job, the less chance you have of being promoted. The other thing about her promotion was it was a promotion, but the title change didn't necessarily make it look like a promotion. So it was like, I forget the exact title, it was like a marketing manager of X to like sort of a media manager of Y. So it looked like it was more of a lateral move. She was reporting to the same person, as well. So, that was something that sort of, caught our attention, okay? But really good leadership, okay? So from my perspective, a lot of good stuff to work with, okay? Not a lot of weaknesses. She was looking at Harvard, Columbia, and Wharton, okay? Recommendations. This actually really bothered me because, I tend to fall in love with my candidates. I don't know why. But this recommender really wrote a recommendation that was focused on the recommender itself. So we literally counted in the first question, like how do you know the candidate, describe the candidate, there were literally 7 mentions of I or we. Okay, while interacting with her, I noticed that we shared a vision. We both. I communicated to our CEO. I recommended her to transfer. She worked for the department that I managed. There were more. We just didn't put them all on here, and that really bothered me because it took the focus off of the candidate, and it really was about sort of what the team did and what the recommender did, and it made me kind of think, I mean, to be totally honest with you, as to whether or not the recommender really had her best interests at heart, because she wasn't giving this candidate the chance to shine and be a superstar. So you have to be sensitive to that. You have to manage your people, okay? There was a little bit of an inconsistency issue. The recommender 1 said she was blunt, direct, and too forward. Recommender 2 said she's shy, introverted, and aloof. That kind of dissonance is not good for an admissions committee, all right? It's not good for you. So make sure you've got these guys on the same page, and make sure if you can, you get a chance to review the recommendation, okay? The recommendations, the improvement, I did not like this. I thought it, the stuff that was critiqued, I thought was to a certain extent a little bit petty, and I just did not think it put the candidate in the best light. So she talked about her being upset. She talked about the candidate complaining. Again, I realized, here we go again with the eyes, right? She talked about the candidate not following the dress code properly. I just thought that this was torpedoing. Is that a word? The candidate's, the candidate's chances. I think there are other things that could have been critiqued. So I want you guys to be sensitive to that. I suspect that this candidate felt that this woman had her best interest at heart, and frankly, this woman may have, but this was way too snippy of a recommendation. The stuff that you want to see for improvement needs to understand, you want to see, needs to learn how to get a big picture, needs to, manage people, learn to manage people with a little bit different perspective than her. Things of that nature, things that are growing. They want to show that, you want to show things that don't undercut, your maturity or business professionalism. They're sort of more so about exposure and duration on the job. And all these things were not, and that really bothered me a lot. So be wary and manage your recommenders, guys, okay? Her essays. So this is for Columbia. This candidate, again, as I mentioned before, was a marketer, as you see here, okay? And what we wanted this candidate to sort of realize was that there's going to be a bias against a candidate that he or she's going to have really, this candidate's going to have really great soft skills, but the analytical skills and a buttoned-up attitude, that's going to be where the schools are really emphasizing and really looking to see, can this person succeed here? Now, if you're an investment banker, it's or an accountant, it's the exact opposite. They know you're going to be good with like the numbers and the analysis and the doing ridiculous modeling, spreadsheet modeling, but not the other kind of modeling. But they want to be clear that you have soft skills, that you're good at management, good at like dealing with people, good at setting goals, etc. And so I did not think the candidate struck the right balance between that. So when you looked at sort of the why MBA, why Columbia, why now, the opening statement, the first sentence was color, or creativity, color, contrast, texture, design, expression, right? It feeds into this marketing stereotype, okay? But it doesn't offer enough support for the business-minded approach that you need, right? And so you guys all have to be sensitive. Each of you have a different vantage point. So some of you are technologists. We got a lot of those. Some of you guys are finance people. Some of you are entrepreneurs. You have to be clear on what the bias is going to be against you and not fall into that trap, okay? So getting back to the buttoned-up attitude, this was actually, it was really casual, right? So it read, to a certain extent, like an undergraduate essay, and we did not like that. So she wrote, how easily my conversation with students flow, right? A better way to say that, I was surprised by the strength of the rapport I had with, with current students. Flow versus rapport. Rapport is more professional. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. I guess that's not really, that's not, this is business writing. Like that's not really professional, to be honest. It's not professional enough. Sure, I'm a big city girl. I felt like I was watching Sex in the City with my wife, right? God, I'm dating myself. But I say this because, and I don't say this to really critique or ridicule the candidate, I just think that these are the things which hurt you. And I think you're a really good candidate, and I'd like to see you get in. So just be aware of this, okay? Your why sort of now answer, basically, you said, well, personal reasons delayed my pursuit of an MBA. But what about the past, right? Like in the past, what is it, why were you ready 2 years ago or a year ago to get an MBA? Like you still haven't really addressed that question, right? The issue of I've plateaued in my job, I've learned sort of the requisite skills, I can't learn these as efficiently, I'm not going to get promoted here, whatever. You haven't really answered the question, and so that concerns me, okay? Life experience that shapes you. I thought it was a little bit unfocused. So you brought up 3 topics: scuba diving, car accident, and a fight with your mother. That was all in the context of one essay. I got how it went together, but it was just too scattered, okay? Also, it was sort of about you, overcoming stress and becoming a scuba diver instructor or passing your exam. Again, that's not something you want to write about necessarily for business school, especially coming from your background. One, because business schools expect to be able to deal with stress well, right? Secondly, you're not coming from McKinsey or a Bain or a Goldman or one of those Google, one of those types of firms, so you want to stress sort of your business analytical skills. You want, if you're going to write about sort of stress, quote unquote, just think about the military guy, right, or woman, right, the Marine, the Navy SEAL, and the stress they're dealing with, and put this in that context when they're comparing you to that. So, or climbing Mount Kilimanjaro or something to that effect. I just did not think this was sort of the best way for you to represent yourself, okay? And sort of the personal situation in terms of fighting with your mother, etc. I want to get into all that on this webinar, but I did not think that like that. I understand to a certain extent that that stuff, it was resolved well, right? And you sort of handled the situation, but I don't necessarily think that that was the best thing for you to bring up, okay? So I thought you had decent essays to good essays, but they're not excellent. And that's kind of what you need to do to get in, okay? In terms of the takeaways, again, manage recommenders. I think that's clear. We've talked about that before. Manage their egos. If you have an egomaniac boss who can't give you credit, during a job, don't think that person's going to have a great ability to give you credit in a recommendation, okay? Change your approach to essay writing. Be clear with your brand. Know the message you want to deliver. So from my perspective, for this candidate, you should have been talking about your analytical capabilities. You should have been talking about your management capabilities. There should have been 3 or 4 core things that you focused on, and not sort of talk so much about the creativity, the marketing side. I kind of assume you're going to have that because that's what you do for a living, right? You've been promoted, okay? So be aware of your weaknesses. Don't fall into that trap, your perceived weaknesses. You wrote, second candidate, that you thought your interview didn't go well. So that can be a real issue, obviously, right? And so make sure you get practice. Just realize that people are going to expect your interview to go well because you were coming from a marketing, public relations background. So there's kind of a higher standard, especially if you're sort of, English is your first language and you come from sort of that background, then you've got to really think about that and make sure you do well. Get practice. Practice with friends, join Toastmasters, get formal support. Our company offers it, other companies offer it, but make sure that your interview is sewn up. When you get that opportunity, you have to run through that wall, okay? If you have a clear message, you have specific talking points, you have specific brand characteristics, that you will find that your interview will go well because you'll be going, it'll be like you're on Meet the Press, right? You'll have certain talking points, you'll get those points, you won't have to remember as much, and it would just be much smoother, okay? Overall, you have a lot of stuff to work with. You thought you were really, really talented. I know you're still on the wait list, I think, for maybe one or 2 schools. Take some of these changes in your letter, your supplemental essay, and make some of these changes, address some of these issues, okay? Make sure you find the right balance of your personality and professionalism. Make sure you choose essay topics that are close to your brand. I think that's sort of clear. And continue to do the things you do in the community. You have really great leadership. You mentioned that you had advocates in sort of the luxury goods department, luxury good clubs at the school who are graduating this year. Stay in touch with them. Build new contacts with the new people that are assuming leadership. So the people from the class of 13, they're going to be elected in a couple of weeks. Reach out to them and build that advocacy, because they may be people you can go to next year if you're waitlisted, and have them put in a good word for you. Okay? Last guy, we're going to sort of motor through this. So this guy, he's a 2+2 candidate from India, really good GPA, phenomenal GMAT, you know, from a very competitive market, right? Indian and Chinese candidates. A fair amount of experience for 2+2. 2+2, by the way, is a program where you apply in your senior year of college, you go work for 2 years, and you get an MBA in 2 years. So that's why it's 2+2. Basically, we thought that you had basically, you know, sort of a fair amount of experience. It wasn't super diverse, though, right? Extracurriculars, yeah, pretty solid, okay? You didn't really write about your impact as much, but you did some really positive things for your age, right, and for sort of your level of development, okay? The theme. So one of the things that we saw come out, and we chose you because we saw this in other candidates as well, is if you were a young candidate in college, 1 or 2 years out, realize that your maturity and poise are going to be very much scrutinized in a way that's not the case for somebody that's 4 to 6 years out, okay? So we thought that you didn't really do a good job showing your maturity and poise, and we'll get to that. You definitely talked about your technical skills, and your essays, you know, they had some good things and some good sentences, but we just did not think that you did a good job emphasizing the first 2 things I mentioned. Again, essay number 1, 3 biggest accomplishments, Harvard, right? Way too colloquial. It magnifies your age. And as a 2+2 candidate, that's a death knell. You should know that there's been a lot of debate. A lot of the older candidates, the regular candidates at HBS, they do not like the fact that there are as many 2+2 candidates there. Okay, so right now it's like 100, 120 out of like a 100-person class. So realize that the school is sensitive to that, and they're looking for exceptionally mature and prepared and focused seniors to be applying. Even though you won't get there until you're basically 24 probably, they still are looking for you to be mature when you apply now. So you start with a quote. Don't start with a quote, okay? Everything I read is kind of what this candidate wrote. So you wrote about being the leader of a youth wing, provide primary health care, and then you wrote, are you gasping? That's just not professional, right? You don't want to write that. You wrote eventually, you know, this is a very confusing word I must add. I didn't understand that, and I thought that that was really undermining your ability to portray yourself in a professional light, okay? There were a lot of grammatical mistakes, so this under here, that is a run-on phrase, right? These are each separate questions. They should be separated by a question mark as opposed to a comma, okay? There was some hubris, right? And, you know, it's a fine line to walk. You got to beat your chest a little bit, but you also have to appear humble, at least pretend to be humble, right? So you mentioned you were selected for the National Youth Award, and you dedicated the award to your team, right? You said you were interested in starting a new business. Do you often hear something like that? And that's exactly what I did 3 years back. That's a little too much pride, a little too much hubris, okay? You went back to high school a little bit too much. So, and we saw this a lot. Like a lot of you that were 4 years out went back to college, right? And you spent a lot of time in college. You can't do that, right? They want more relevant stuff. In fact, MIT even says we want your last 3 years of accomplishments. But you've got to realize, even when that's not said, you have to deal with more recent history. It's okay to write a little bit of sort of your past. So you wrote, for example, about being sort of the best student in 8th or 10th grade. You wrote about sort of being strong in the 2nd through 9th grade when you're 7. You know, you're 21, 22 now. You can't do that. But that's also a lesson for those that are older. If you're 26, 27, do not write a lot about what you're doing 18, 19, 21, 22 unless it's phenomenal stuff, okay? Essay number 2, 3 setbacks. So you didn't really have great transitions, and frankly, I couldn't really tell what the setbacks were because all the setbacks had wins. So look, if you're having a real setback, and a lot of schools ask you for failures, it's okay to talk about lessons learned, but they have to be real failures. They can't just be challenges that you overcame. That's not really a setback. They want to see how you respond to failure, lessons learned, how you apply those lessons in the future, okay? So I won't go through all this, but generally I think you sort of get the point. So I want to talk about the last point before we get to some questions and we wrap up. You had a lot of quotes, and we sort of called you the philosopher internally. So It's not always liberal art that can comment on women's fancies. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You know, I learned there's many a slip between the cup and the lip. Actually learned that from my mother. But you don't want to write about this stuff in your application. None of you want to write about this, okay? Why do you want an MBA? You didn't have an articulated plan. It read like a manifesto. So, you know, people are craving for capital with human faces and ventures with social missions. Governments are becoming weaker. You know, it felt like I was watching, I can't remember that movie with Guy Fawkes, but you know, it didn't read like a MBA application. Okay, I did not like the fact that you trashed your undergraduate school a little bit. So, and none of you guys should do this. So you mentioned about your undergraduate school producing like sort of monotonous education, creating automatons, not giving you novelty and versatility. You don't want to do that. That makes you look petty. It makes you look immature. And frankly, you know, you have to realize some of these business schools have relationships with some of these schools also. So when you do that, they may know people at these schools. So you don't want to do that. Okay. General themes, good technical profile. For those of you that are very young, you need a very strong signature accomplishment. You need something. I ran, you know, there was a point in time like when Harvard would accept every year the person that ran Let's Go, like the travel publication, because they had like a $2 million budget. They were managing people. You need to have a signature accomplishment if you're young. Okay, it's very important. Okay, and you have to be clear. You have to have a corporate presence. You have to have leadership. Okay, essays, they need a lot of work. Your YHBS was not clear like the other people. You were not positive in your essay tone. I thought that your resume just threw a lot of stuff in there and just seemed like a brain dump, and you didn't prioritize. So those are the things that you need to fix. Okay, that's kind of it for that. Those of you guys always ask my help. We do a full service package. It's all on our website. I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on this, but this is what we do to offer people help. This is what you get if you need help on everything. Hourly, if you have a more restrictive budget and you need help a little bit here and there, maybe you've got friends that can help you, that can work. The timing is really any time when the application is released. Final review package, that's where you write everything, and we will basically, you take it as far as you can, and then we will be your Ohio State Buckeye red zone offense, and we will basically edit everything, do one round of edits and help you on that. And then we've got a ding analysis. That's what we're doing now. That's what you guys just heard. It'll be a little bit more detail and different for those of you who talk to you directly. But the timing of that's now. So if you're interested in that, sign up. We can talk about it. Pre-application package, that's how you get yourself ready before the applications come out, so we can address some weaknesses, give you some ideas on things you can sort of build on, strengths and weaknesses, and you'll get a sort of a comprehensive document which gives you a really strong set of direction. That's a now thing too. Now, we do this thing where we're giving you guys until tax day, in the States anyway, there's a $500 credit on any admissions package. So if you sign up for a ding analysis and you end up using us in the future, we will literally give you a $500 discount off of any future package. Okay? If you sign up after April 15th for a ding, it's going to be half of it. And the same with the pre-application package. So we try to take care of you guys. Get help soon. Look, would love you guys to get help from us. Get help from somebody if you need it. Okay? Ultimately, we want you guys getting in. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Find our blog. We're trying to do more of that. There's a 5% discount if you do not do a pre-application package or you do not do a ding analysis package. We will give you a 5% discount using the coupon code 1908. Actually, Eric will probably shoot me for this. We will give you a 10% discount package, actually, if you 10% discount package using discount code 1908. Okay? You can sign up for a free consultation starting tomorrow. Reach out to me. All I ask you guys now is that you pray for Ohio State in the Final Four. We're trying to bring it home this year. So with that, I will take questions.
Thank you so much, Kofi. Really great session as usual. However, you always break my heart because of those Ohio State references that you throw in these sessions. As a diehard Michigan and Michigan State fan, I bid you not happy thoughts towards Ohio State.
That hurts.
But the floor is yours, so I'll let it stay for today. And also, as usual, Kofi, we received a lot of great questions from our audience. So we're running
We'll
over
take
time.
all the questions. Yeah, Eric, we'll take all the questions later if we can't get them all in now. They can email them.
Okay, great. Appreciate that. I mean, I know we're running a little bit over, but if you're game to do maybe a couple of questions for the next 10 minutes, we can try to tackle
Absolutely.
some.
Absolutely.
All right, great. So let's see. I saw a really good question from I think this person's name is pronounced Jung Chan. Let's say Jay. And this is a question about running the fine line between being consistent around your themes, which you talked about before, and being well-rounded. So the question was, if you have a specific theme around 2 or 3 traits, wouldn't the admissions committee think you're not a well-rounded person? Can you talk a little bit more and clarify your points from earlier?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the admissions committee will see you well-rounded based on the different activities that you do, based on the clubs and organizations that you're part of in college, based on the things you're doing outside of school once you've graduated.
Mm-hmm.
When I talk about being consistent in terms of your theme, and I don't think I said 2 or 3, let's call it 3 to 5, what I mean is you want to have a brand that makes them feel like you're going to be successful, okay? You want them to be able to advocate for you. These admissions officers are reading thousands, if not 7,000 to 10,000, 15,000 applications a year, and they have to advocate for you. You have to give them something, some short snippets, a synopsis of sort of who you are. So entrepreneurial, go-getter, very analytical, community-minded, right? And you want the different platforms. You've got 4 platforms, maybe 5, that you can sort of work these things through. You've got your essays, you've got your letters of recommendation, you have your resume, you have the non-essay data portion of your application, and you have your interview if you get it. Those are 5 platforms. And so what you don't want is for different people to be saying different things about you, and you have like 15 things that they've sort of said, but they've all said them lukewarm, right? You want like 3 to 5 things, probably closer to 3 to 4 things said in multiple areas about you that are really, really positive. In terms of the well-roundedness, that will come from, all the activities, the awards, the resume stuff that you have.
Gotcha. Great. One of the things that you referenced earlier in your presentation was also the notion of supplementing your academic background. So let's say that I'm a little bit weak in my quant background, which is true. I was a sociology major in college, and I wanted to make myself look a little stronger. I can do community college. I can do maybe some supplementary courses in the university. But what are your thoughts about supplementing yourself through online courses? Does that count?
It does count. I don't love that as much. So I would say you go to the best place possible. Now, a lot of the best place possible in terms of what you can afford in terms of time and money. A lot of the international candidates we work with, they don't necessarily have this. We work with a lot of Indian candidates, and they do like the UCLA online training. I would say you want to go to like sort of the best school. So my hierarchy would probably be like the best sort of like maybe private school, then maybe like the best like community college, then online. So I live in New York. It would be like probably like NYU, and then maybe it would be like I'm trying to think of like a community. Like let's say I lived in Boston, right? So it'd be like Harvard as like a school of continuing education up there.
Mm-hmm.
Then it might be like Roxbury Community College, and then it might be like online. But you should you want the A, because you guys are all going to get A's. You want the A that you get to be considered very strong and accepted. You don't want them to think that you just sort of got it like haphazardly. And that's the problem is like most of the online programs, they're not seen as quite as rigorous because there's no in-person component. So.
Well, let me follow on to that question with maybe another route for demonstrating or supplementing your academics. So what if I were to do maybe community service projects that are more quantitative, quant-oriented in like an advisory capacity, or even a startup on the side that had some technical aspects to it? Is that something that can help supplement an academic background besides what you recommended with taking these courses?
Not in the same way, because there isn't necessarily an objective review of your work, and most of the time people they have got to supplement quant, right? So, but there is a way to do that. So I'll give you an example. So I actually talked to a guy today who did not do that well in his quant section of his GMAT, but he taught a financial modeling class to a really complex he built a really robust, basically, model in his job that was used for, that was presented to the chief operating officer and the CFO of investment bank, and it was a really big investment bank. So those kinds of things are really great sort of other activities, but working for a startup, generally that's not going to cut it, because where you have to show that you're weak is probably, on the quant side. So it's probably dealing with, finance, accounting, math, statistics, etc. And you're not really going to find most startups, unless you're doing sort of a financially oriented startup like that, they're not going to afford you the opportunity to really address those things.
Gotcha. And Kofi, just a quick note, we kind of were losing your audio a little bit in that answer, but
sorry, I'm sorry.
Okay, got you back. No worries. I like this next question that came in. I think the person who submitted it is very brave for asking. So I'm not a perfect person. Kofi, I'm sure you're not either. But what are your thoughts about addressing prior legal issues? What if you had issues with possession of alcohol when you're a minor, or sort of minor run-ins with the law that are on your adult record? Any thoughts on how you tackle that?
My first thought is you absolutely have to tackle it. My second part of the response is we've actually seen that. So that is not as atypical as you might think. So we had a candidate a couple years ago that had a DUI and got kicked out of school. We had a candidate that basically got suspended for like distributing drugs on campus. Both those guys got into school, by the way, just to let you know. They both got into, one got into Duke. I can't remember where the other one got in, but it was like a Michigan type school. It was a very good school as well. So you have to address those things. I think you clearly need to hopefully create some distance, talk about lessons learned, and talk about lessons learned and how you apply them. So if you got kicked out of school potentially for fighting, you can talk about how you've learned to resolve conflict differently. When another conflict came up, you handled it X, Y, and Z way. Maybe you took some of those lessons learned in your volunteering, speaking to young kids, not to make that kind of mistake. But you absolutely need to bring it up. Most of these schools have the threat of, and they take a certain segment of people and do background checks, and they will rescind your application if you've been arrested and you don't say anything. So, you just have to address it head on, to be honest with you. I hope everything else is really good about your stuff, so you've got good grades and a good GMAT. It definitely is going to be a blemish, but at the same time, we've seen at least probably three or four people have those kinds of issues and all get into school.
Gotcha. So, I mean, no point in trying to hide it, addressing it head on. It's really the mature thing to do, and if you can frame it properly, it's definitely overcomable. So,
absolutely.
All right. Well, unfortunately, Kofi, I think we're out of time with new questions, but I will end with a comment that came in from Diana. She says, "Woohoo! Ohio State Buckeye here too." Smiley face.
Thank you, Diana. I did not go to Ohio State. I went to Harvard, as you guys know, but I'm from Ohio, and my wife is from Akron. And my mom actually treated LeBron James' aunt before he was LeBron James, of course, or else I wouldn't be doing this. But anyway, I appreciate that. Give some Buckeyes some love. And if you guys have questions, just email them. We'll try to get back, or sign up for a consultation, and we can probably address those questions and talk about other stuff as well. Okay?
Thanks so much. So we have been speaking with Kofi Kankam. Kofi is the co-founder of Admit Advantage, an elite MBA admissions consulting firm, or admissions consulting just generally firm. And Kofi has walked us through a variety of cases of dings from Beat The GMAT members, and had some thoughts as well as analyses on what might have happened and how these people can improve moving forward. Thank you guys so much for spending your evening with us and spending your time learning about these dings and what we can do to make them better in the future for better results. A couple things. So Kofi has provided details about a really, really generous discount and promotion for Beat The GMAT community members attending this session today. You'll be able to learn more by going to admitadvantage.com/beatthegmat. You can see that link right on the slide in front of you. And we will have a recording of this session available most likely within the next 24 hours, and we'll reach out with a link when it's available. So thank you guys so much, and best of luck to you, and I hope that you aren't discouraged by your dings but decide to reapply, and you have good people like Kofi behind you to help you along the way to help you figure that out. So thank you again, guys, and hopefully we'll see you in a future session. All the best.